It's all the hustle.com, exposing the truth in a world full of lies.
We can't stop here, they said.
That's the only way you'll silence me. And the Federal Reserve. And the Fed. And the Federal Reserve.
Quickly, in 1910, Senator Aldrich on his private train brought a bunch of billionaire bankers, the Morgans, all these different people, Warburgs, down to this place called Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, and they figured out a way to create the Federal Reserve, because central banks were looked down upon by the people, and they caused a lot of problems. By creating the Federal Reserve, they convinced the Congress and the people that the Federal Reserve is a government arm. It's not. They borrow money from private banks. We're owned by banks.
It was 1913. Woodrow Wilson was president, and powerful banking interests, who had been trying for years, finally achieved their long-term goal of a silent coup d'etat by taking control of the American government. That very same year, the bankers committed their second and by far most diabolical fraud ever perpetrated on the American people by bribing senators to pass the Federal Reserve Act without the required constitutional amendment.
All in favor, say aye.
They did this during Christmas vacation, when many senators were home celebrating the holidays with their families. And that's how the unconstitutional Federal Reserve Act came into being. They were very clever, and they understood that whoever issued the money for America would control the government. The bankers won, and the American people lost.
We come to the amazing conclusion that the Federal Reserve System is basically a cartel, a banking cartel, that has gone into partnership with the federal government of the United States so that the federal laws can be used to enforce the cartel agreement. What we have here is a banking cartel which has gone into partnership with the federal government, and they've used this cozy relationship so that the government has given the banks the power to create the nation's money supply. The banks now, these private banks, have the monopoly over the nation's money supply.
The banking cartel funded, in fact, since about 1800, they have funded both sides of almost every war. And of course, they're getting the interest off of the loans that they've given the various governments and the wars that they have actually helped stimulate and create.
At least 20 million were killed in the war. It was a conflict so terrible the people vowed to never fight again. They dubbed it the War to End All Wars.
The question is, why did they want war? Well, first of all, is money and power. But secondly, they wanted to create the League of Nations. They had this in their plans all along, and as a consequence, once the war was over or about to be over, they began to formulate this idea of a League of Nations, so this would never ever happen again.
Hundreds of years of practice made the British experts at hiding their empire behind puppet governments and councils. In the name of stopping all future conflicts, they proposed that countries would join a League of Nations. Their true intention was for the League to serve as a framework for world government. Once again, the elite claimed that only global governance could save humanity from certain destruction. And this time, the elite would succeed in setting up their world body. In April of 1945, at the Presidio Naval Base in San Francisco, the United Nations was founded by the victors of World War II. The United Nations complex was then built in New York City on land donated by John D. Rockefeller. Shortly after, the elite established the United Nations as their base in the United States. The newly formed World Council quickly began work on the next phase in their plan.
In the months before 9/11. And Robin Cook, the former Foreign Secretary, who unfortunately died of a heart attack when he had lots of things to say on this, he said in a Guardian article just before he died, throughout the 80s, bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally the computer file of thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with the help of the CIA to defeat the Russians. They created the problem and then offer the solution, which is a war on terror that, by its very nature, is a war you can never say has ended.
For a long time in South Central, the buzzword was that the CIA was selling crack. I said, no, the CIA wasn't selling crack. The CIA was importing cocaine. Ricky Ross got it, turned it into crack, and he sold it.
I am a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, and I worked South Central Los Angeles, and I will tell you, Director Deutsch, and the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
I was able to name operations. Thank you.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country.
That policy would be defined by a front group formed by J.P. Morgan and his colleagues. In fact, Morgan's personal attorney was founding president of the organization, the Council on Foreign Relations. Today, the CFR maintains that its goal is to increase America's understanding of the world. However, the actual objective of this highly exclusive club is revealed by the rare admissions of the insiders themselves. Professor Carol Quigley is allowed to examine the confidential papers and secret records of this network. Quigley reveals that these men aim to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. In short, they seek total and quiet control of the entire world.